بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وتابعين لهم بخير وإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم. Beloved brothers and sisters in Islam and those who are in the viewing audience, Assalamu alaikum. I am your needy brother Dawood, Executive Director of CAIR Michigan, and today we will be having a short presentation as we try to regularly have online educational presentations, which allows viewers lifetime to ask questions to our staff, but also experts and people who are working in activism and organizing spaces. And today we have a special guest that's with us today, along with our staff attorney, Sister Amy, who all of you know, when we have our sister Rebeka Islam, who has joined us today. And she's doing some very important work at APIA Vote, Michigan. Beyond that, I just want to say for you all that, it's a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, "Man yashkurullah, man la yashkurun nas," that one does not truly thank God who does not show appreciation to people. So before we turn it over to Sister Rebeka to give her portion of the presentation about the importance of getting out the vote, on behalf of CAIR Michigan staff and board, we'd like to, proverbially give Sister Rebeka her flowers. She's been working very hard at her job, and also just in general, trying to help empower Michigan Muslims, and especially with the political turmoil that's going on right now in the Middle East, and specifically with the ethnic cleansing that has been taking place since October in Gaza. So we'd like to, salute her and to give her, voice on our platform. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, Sister Rebeka, increase you in beneficial knowledge, give you refuge from knowledge which has no benefit, increase you in your rizq. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise up your spiritual maqam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you from all of the devils amongst the jinn and the men. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you from the evil eye and to protect you from envy of those who seek to have jealousy and envy. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you a righteous company in this life and grant you the best company in the akhirah with Al-Habib al-Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And with that, I am going to pass the mic over to Sister Rebeka and take Sister Amy and I off the stage. And then we will bring Sister Amy on after Sister Rebeka gives her valuable presentation in regards to get out the vote and the importance of the November election.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. I totally forgot what I was going to say with all the love and just appreciation. Jazakallah khair. I'm just so grateful to be in this space. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Rebeka Islam, and I am honored to serve as the Executive Director of APIA Vote Michigan, as Brother Dawood mentioned. And really, I'm just deeply grateful for the opportunity to join you all today. And Brother Dawood, Jazakallah khair. Again, I'm like, oh my God, all over the place. Jazakallah khair. That was just such a beautiful dua that you made. May Allah accept all of us. Jazakallah khair. So as Brother Dawood kind of highlighted, I'd like to talk about a topic that has really gained increasing attention due to recent events, and that's voting. My organization is a nonprofit organization that's really dedicated to advocacy within the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color community here in Michigan. And in light of various challenges we're facing in our communities, whether it's locally here in Detroit or globally in Palestine, it's imperative to recognize the impact that our votes have in shaping policies that reflect our values and address our concerns. Again, whether it's local policies or foreign affairs policies. You know, we hear all the time voting is our civic duty, it's our right, but really it is a powerful tool for affecting positive change in our neighborhoods and beyond, like I said, whether it's locally or internationally. When we vote, we are empowering ourselves to advocate for um, better schools, safer streets, improved healthcare, equitable opportunities. And when we are collectively exercising our right to vote, we are amplifying our voices to ensure that um, our priorities deserve the attention, they receive the attention that they deserve. Again, there has been so many folks upset, you know, we're so upset about what's happening in the Middle East, and rightfully so. And it feels like, you know, what are we supposed to do? There's so much we can do, and it starts with voting, right? When you have the right people in office, you will see policies that reflect your values. You know, while our community has made significant strides in the voting engagement and civic engagement platform, there's so much more work that needs to be done. And historically, voter registration and voter turnout rates amongst BIPOC community has been lower than what we'd like to see. However, with recent events, we're witnessing a shift within our community, increasingly becoming a a voting block. We are seeing people who have never been to city council meetings. We are seeing people who have never voted coming out to vote, and it's so important to continue this momentum and make our voices heard at the ballot box. We're seeing people call phone bank, you know, call their elected officials saying we want a ceasefire or we want this. You know, it's so important that we keep on building on that momentum and utilize our voice. So I want to just quickly highlight a few of the reasons why voting is so essential. It starts, again, very local. Elections impact your everyday lives, your family's lives. Voting influences critical decisions such as education, school systems, infrastructure, healthcare, employment, and public safety, both locally and abroad. There's ideas of like, you know, it's just one vote. Does my vote count? You know, every vote counts, especially everyone. People of color, BIPOC community members are increasingly pivotal in determining election outcomes. For my organization, we obviously monitor data from BIPOC and Asian American communities. Asian Americans are a fast growing majority here in the state and throughout the country, and are now a mass voting bloc. So that's how you know our votes are counting, because it's showing up in the census, it's showing up in the ballot boxes, it's showing up in the voting blocks. And when you vote, you're deciding where your tax dollars go, right? We're always like, oh my goodness, we're paying so much for taxes. You know, the taxes went up again this year, property taxes, sales taxes. But when you vote, you are allowing yourself, you're enabling us to help budget allocations. The tax dollars are going to get deducted. You're going to have to pay taxes. But isn't it better to have a say in where that money goes? You know, isn't it better to prioritize community projects? So when you vote, you have a say. You are electing accountable leaders who will be making those budgets for your city, for your state. So it's so important. Again, I cannot emphasize it. You're going to hear this over and over, why it's so important to vote, because we really need our communities to vote, especially this year. In any year, right? Like this year, we have a presidential election, but voting starts so local. It's not the president who's making decisions on what happens at a school board or what happens at a city council or at a city level, what happens to your roads, what happens to your potholes. Like, that's all local, and it's so important that we engage in those decisions. And voting, again, is a crucial tool for, there's so much systematic injustice And voting, again, is a tool for combating that systematic injustice and ensuring that our concerns are addressed by our elected officials. It allows you to hold your elected officials accountable and really uphold your democratic values. So, it's so important. And I'm just going to quickly, again, highlight um, how to register to vote here in Michigan. Now that we know it's so important, we want to know, how does one who hasn't registered to vote or who has to update their voter registration profile do that? So in Michigan, to register to vote, you must be a U.S. citizen, a resident of Michigan, and at least 18 years old by election day. And it can be any election. So there's a special election on April 16th. As long as you are 18 years old on election day, by election day, you can still vote. And in Michigan, we also have pre-registration. So if you are 16 and a half, you can pre-register, which means you can fill out your application, and by the time you turn 18, you will automatically receive you'll be in the system and you'll receive your voter registration card to able to vote. One more thing is that in order to register to vote in Michigan, you must not be serving a sentence in jail or prison. However, in Michigan, you only lose your right to vote if you are, again, currently incarcerated for a misdemeanor or a felony, and your rights are not restricted by pretrial detention or misdemeanor or probation or parole. And if you can immediately register to vote after release. So I just want to share that there's some misconception about that, but as soon as you are released, you can vote or you can register to vote, and that does not apply for probation or parole. So in Michigan, one more thing is that you don't need to have a permanent or fixed home. You can register to vote by providing a description of an address or a shelter or like a park address. You could say, the Cass Park. That's a very common park here in Detroit. So you can use that as your address. Or a place like a mailing address can also be like a PO box mailing address. An advocacy organization that might allow you to use it, an outreach center, or a home of someone who will accept mail for you. So that can also be considered as your residency. So, if anyone is living at a homeless shelter, like that could be also an address that they use. So there are a few ways to register. And I know it can feel like a lot, and I will definitely drop some links towards the end of our session here, so that you can follow along and really support you and yourself, whoever needs to register. So if you are trying to register, say between now and election day, and so prior to 14 days of election, you can register online, you can register at a Secretary of State's branch office, you can register by mail, you can register at a city or clerk's township office, or you can register like my organization or any organization that does voter registration. Our organization does voter registration. You can do that through a voter registration drive, or again, by mailing in your voter registration. That's only if there's still more than 14 days of an election. So there's still you have an election coming up, and there's still 2 more weeks till election day. However, if there is less than 14 days, so beginning on the 14th day before the election and through 8 p.m. on election day, you only have one way to register to vote, and that's by visiting your city or your township clerk's office. And you must have proof of where you live. The document must have your name and your current address. Documents can include your Michigan driver's license or your state ID, or a utility bill or a bank statement, a government check or a paycheck, any other government document that would have your name and can verify your address. And that's again, so I want to make sure, I want to just be clear on that. If there's still 14 days left, 14 days, you can register online by mail. But if you are in that 14-day period, you have to register at your clerk's office. You cannot, even if you're at the masjid or if you're at an event and you know the election day is in 14 days, then you should not be mailing your documents out. You should not be mailing your application. You should be going to your clerk's office, your township's office to register to vote. And right now we are in the month of Ramadan, and I encourage everyone to really take advantage of the gatherings, whether it's at Tarawih prayers, whether it's at iftar times, to help register your friends and family in the community. We can register online now because we're not in that period right now. So this is, at least for the Muslim community, this is probably the most that we see our friends and family during the month of Ramadan throughout the year, right? While you're waiting for Tarawih to start, I know the sister side, we're definitely chatting it up, but why not have that conversation and ask your friend who's right next to you, who's getting ready to pray, and ask, hey, are you registered to vote? If not, here is a very simple way to do it. And again, I will drop the links on where you can go to register to vote. I'll just mention it here. It's very simple. It's michigan.gov/vote. And that's where you can register to vote. It walks you step by step. It tells you where to go, where to register, what you need, and all of that information. Quickly want to just mention that there are some important elections coming up. April 16th, it is a special election. So it might not be relevant to everyone. It's House District 13 and 25 special general elections for House Districts 13 and 25. There is a primary coming up in August. August 6th is the primary. So if you want to vote on the August 6th primary, you have so much time. You have plenty of time to register to vote now. You in Michigan, even though this is August 6th, in Michigan, we also have something called early voting period, 9 days of early voting. So you can really, there's so many ways to, once you're registered to vote, there's so many ways to vote. You can do absentee ballot. You can do 9 early days of voting, which means is that 9 days before election, you can go into your polling location or your clerk's office so that you can cast your vote. And then we all probably know, but I want to remind everyone, we have the general election on November 5th. So again, if you, for whatever reason, don't even want to participate in the primaries, we encourage you, again, to vote in every election, whether it's a small, just one ballot, school initiative ballot, you should still vote. November 5th is the general election. So it's so important, again, that we are registered and ready. We're doing our education to see who's on the ballot so that come August 6th, come November 5th, you are ready to vote. You are ready to utilize your vote. Really, I know we say this all the time, our vote, your vote is really your voice. And it holds so much power. And fortunately or unfortunately, voting is the only way for us to have a direct impact and really have a voice in our democracy. So I will pause there for now and then see if there's any question. And again, if anyone requires any assistance with voter registration forms, materials, or hosting voter registration drives, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll link my information if it's okay with Brother Zawood. For anyone who wants to host a voter registration drive, we have the materials, we have the training materials, we will process the forms for you. You don't have to worry about it. Really, it's a very simple process, but it's a very powerful tool that we all have. So again, I just want to say thank you so much for having me today.
No problem. Thank you for your presentation. And for the viewers who are watching, of course, at the end, if no one has any direct question now, at the very end, we will avail ourselves for Q&A. For Sister Rebeka, or Sister Amy, I'm bringing on the stage next. I do want to just double click or kind of highlight something that Sister Rebeka mentioned. And sometimes we tend to look at the bigger races, we think they're bigger races for the national level, be it like, for instance, the primary that will be coming up in terms of who will the Democratic nominee be for the Senate here in the state of Michigan, right? Or the November election in which we are voting for our congressional members in Washington, D.C., as well as who will be the 47th president of these United States of America. I remind you all, however, that there's a famous saying by the late Speaker of the House, who was an Irish American in Massachusetts, Tip O'Neill. And he famously said, "All politics is local." And so, yeah, there is local import on these national elections, even on international issues. However, some of our most important voting decisions relate to local politics and then the state level. So our school board members are very important voting for, because this influences curriculum, what type of books are going to be available for students who are minors, certain things that relate to issues of gender and sexuality that religious people may have concerns about. This like at the school board, how our communities are policed. There's a direct relationship between the mayor's office and who's a police chief, what types of trainings that the city will avail themselves to. I can tell you from our perspective, there's been a big difference in the city of Dearborn from the previous mayor to the current mayor and the new police chief, and even the interactions that we've had with this police chief, who's an Arab American, compared to even the former police chief, who's an Arab American. This relates to local elections. How our civil rights can be negatively impacted by legislation on the state level. It's not just issues on the federal level, but the state level, and the putting in jeopardy our First Amendment protected rights, as we saw with some two very problematic bills from CAIR Michigan's perspective that were passed. State level and state legislature that Governor Whitmer passed. So, or like so these are very important elections. It's not just the national level or a congressman who talks about Gaza being nuked, for instance, right? All of these are important, and keep in mind that we need to keep our eyes also on local issues and that really have probably more day-to-day impact on our lives or the lives of our children, those of us who have children in public schools. We need to really keep our eyes on. I'm going to bring you back on stage, Sister Rebeka, at the very end for any questions that may come up or any concluding comments that you may want to add on. And with that, I'm bringing on Sister Amy. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, everybody.
Okay, we're going to take ourselves off now.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thanks for joining CAIR Michigan and APIA Vote to talk about this important issue of voting. I'm going to talk a little bit about what your rights are while you're voting. I know that Sister Rebeka touched on a lot of the areas that are very important, like who has the right to vote. As Sister Rebeka said, all U.S. citizens have the right to vote. It doesn't matter whether you were born here or whether you were naturalized. As long as you're a U.S. citizen, you have the right to vote. There's some information out about in Michigan about whether or not you can vote if you've been convicted of a felony. Michigan does not have automatic revocation of your voting rights because you've been convicted of a felony. The only time that your rights are affected for voting if you've been convicted of a felony is if you are actively serving your sentence on that felony. Once you've served your sentence on the felony, your voting rights remain intact. And I think that's important for people to know, because we don't want people to be accidentally disenfranchised from their voting rights because they've been given misinformation. When on the day of voting, people have the right to go to the polls, and they have the right to vote without fear of intimidation. This means when you're at the polls, poll workers can't, instill fear or intimidation into you about who you're voting for, about the way you're voting. People outside can't do that. We've seen in the past, including very recently at the primary here in Canton, there were people outside of the Canton clerk's office engaging in harassing and intimidating behavior. You have an absolute fundamental legal right to vote without that fear and intimidation. And if you are being harassed at the polls, you need to immediately call law enforcement. You call your city clerk's office, and you can also call voter protection hotlines, which we post usually on our social media each and every time that there's a vote. As Sister Rebeka said, in Michigan, we have same-day registration for voting, which means you can vote up until 8, you can register to vote up until 8 p.m. On the day of the election. And that includes whether it's a primary, whether it's a special election, or whether it's just the general election that we hold in November every year, every few years. So you can vote, you can register to vote. If you do engage in same-day voter registration, you will just vote via an absentee ballot that you submit at the clerk's office while you're there registering to vote. People, we get a lot of calls at our office, on voting days about people who need maybe special accommodations at the polls, maybe because they have limited English proficiency. So you do not have to be fluent in English to vote. You can be fluent, and some people who are fluent are not comfortable voting in English because maybe their first reading language isn't English, and we need to make sure that we are voting confidently and competently. So what are some of the accommodations that people are entitled to? So initially, people are entitled to take any person that they want as an assistant for any portion of assistance that they need at the vote in the ballot booth. So when you arrive at your polling location on the day of an election, you have the right to arrive with any person that you want. It can be a family member, it can be a friend, it can be, a neighbor, anybody who you feel comfortable to assist you. And that person can go with you when you are in the ballot booth, actually marking your ballot, and they can help you translate the ballot. They could read it to you in your own language. They can assist you in any way that you see fit about how to vote or how to effectuate your vote onto the ballot. And that's true whether or not poll workers challenge you. Even if polls or poll workers provide official translators at the ballot station at the polling place, you're not required to use their official translators. You can use anybody that you choose. And in a lot of cities where there's a large population of people who maybe speak their native language is different than English, and they have a large population of those people who speak the same language, whether it's Spanish, whether it's Arabic, whether it's Bengali, those people have the right to have a ballot that's actually translated into their national language. I know in Dearborn and Hamtramck, we have ballots in multiple languages so that people can get a ballot that they're more comfortable with. And that's a right. So those are two of the primary accommodations that people are afforded with at the polling place that have come to our attention as being an issue. So you can have both the ballot translated into a language of your choosing, and you can also have the person of your choosing assist you. One of the other things I think is very important to know is that you can get a copy of your ballot ahead of time. So if you go to the Michigan Secretary of State website, they have actual copies of your specific ballot, depending on which jurisdiction that you're in and which polling place you're going to have. So it'll be your specific ballot, and it will have it'll be a different color, but it'll look exactly like the ballot that you're going to be voting on in the election. And you have the right to get the copy of that ballot. You can also get one from your city clerk's office, and you have the right to go home and study it, study the people who are on it, and actually mark it up. And if you wanted to, you could take that ballot with you to your polling place, and you can kind of use it like a quote unquote cheat sheet. So you can look at how you voted at home, and you can kind of match it to the ballot that is that is going to be the official ballot that you have. And there's sometimes there's some confusion about what you can and cannot take with you in the polling place. You can take any written materials that you want into the polling place. What you can't do is you can't pass out political literature inside of the polling place or at the door of the polling place. But if you have materials written or otherwise that you are using for your own assistance, you can take that with you into the polling place, and people cannot stop you from doing so. Voting, there's some question about whether you are required to have an ID while you're voting. And while it's always good to have an ID with you to prove your identity, because one thing you do have to do is you have to prove your identity when you go to vote to say that you are the person that is registered to vote, registered at that polling place. But an ID is not required. If you have a state ID, driver's license, identification card, or a federal passport, you can take that with you to the polling place, and those are always acceptable forms of ID. But if you don't have one of those IDs, you cannot be turned away from voting. You still have the right to vote. And this is true even if somebody challenges, or even if a poll worker challenges your right or your ability to vote, you still have the right to vote, and you should absolutely demand to be given a ballot. So what does that look like? You can present alternative forms of identification. As Sister Rebeka said, that could be, a medical bill. It could be a DTE or cellular phone bill. It could be a bank statement. It could be your employment paycheck, or a paycheck from the government, or a military ID. Excuse me. Even if you don't have an alternative form of ID, you can still vote. And how you vote is you vote by signing an affidavit, and you would file a provisional ballot, and you would sign an affidavit of identity, and you would still vote. And those ballots would be set aside, and at a different time on a different location, when they're tallying up the votes, they would look to make sure that the ballot received all of the requirements that were necessary to be counted. And if your ballot is challenged, they have to let you know that your ballot has been challenged during the tallying procedure, and then you have a right to go down to the clerk's office and actually advocate for your ballot and cure whatever defect they're saying is evident in your ballot. So as long as you vote on that day, and as long as you vote on either an original ballot or a provisional ballot, your vote should be counted, and you should not be turned away from the polls. Another thing that's important to understand is when we have elections during election seasons like right now, where these elections are very, very important, they're hotly contested, there's a lot of issues that are on the ballot, even just with our presidential candidates and with our school board elections, there's a large interest, which could result in long lines at the polls. If you are in line at your polling place, or at your city clerk's office to vote, to register to vote, or to vote by 8 p.m., you cannot be turned away as long as you stay in line. So if you get there at 7:55 and there's a long line and the line is out the door, as long as you remain in line, they have to let everybody vote until they finish the last person who got in line by 8 p.m. So never get out of line once you've gotten in line to vote, and never allow anybody to turn you away from voting, because there's always ways to vote on a provisional ballot or to enforce your rights to vote. So what about if somebody does challenge your right to vote? Because this happens from time to time. And we actually saw this in Hamtramck a few years ago, where somebody went in and they said, you can't vote today because you don't have your ID, because you don't have this, because we don't think that you're part of this. This is the correct polling place for you. What you should do is you should insist on voting. You should know your rights. You should insist on voting. You should say, I want a provisional ballot. I want an affidavit. I want to be able to exercise my right to vote. And then you vote, and then you can go to the city clerk's office and you can inform them that you voted on a provisional ballot, and you want to be notified if your ballot is challenged. Because there's a difference between having your right to vote challenged and having your ballot challenged. Once your right to vote is challenged, you still have the right to cast that vote. And the only way your vote counts and the only way your vote matters is if you actually cast your vote. If you leave the line, or you decide not to vote because it's been your right to vote has been challenged, you'll never get a ballot. But once you've cast that ballot, there are ways to advocate to keep that ballot in play so that your vote can be counted. So those really are your basic rights. There's a lot more rights. And as we get closer to Election Day, I'm sure we'll go over some more of them and we'll provide some more information. But those are your rights as they stand right now. The other thing is, the last thing I want to talk about is your right to obtain an absentee ballot. Michigan has no restrictions on who can and cannot receive an absentee ballot. If you are more comfortable voting at home, you simply have to request an absentee ballot and one will be mailed to you. You do not have to provide a valid reason. You do not have to have a disability or a medical condition. You do not have to be out of the country or out of the state on voting day. Any person who wants an absentee ballot can have an absentee ballot and can vote absentee if that's what you choose to do, if that's what makes you more comfortable. And I know some people like that because it gives you time to really go through and see all of the people on the candidate that are candidates for different things, especially judges, local elections. Usually there's a lot of people on the ballot that maybe we're not aware of, because everybody's so focused on these big elections: who's our senator, who's going to be our president and vice president, and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of local elections that we need to do a lot of background work on for the candidates that might not be so familiar to us. So getting either getting a sample ballot and going through that, or even getting your absentee ballot and having that on hand and then filling it out and mailing it in. When you get an absentee ballot, you can either mail it back, you can drop it off up to the 8 p.m. on the day of elections, and for it to be counted, or you can drop it in one of the drop boxes. So there are so many ways that you can vote. Voting early, voting absentee, or voting on the day of the election are all available in Michigan. And I hope to see everybody at the polls. And if you have any questions, I think Brother Dow is going to come back with Sister Rebeka, and we're going to open it up for questions at this time.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for the valuable presentation. And just to, remind everyone, as we normally do, as we get closer to election day, we will be disseminating more information on social media. And we will also have another one of these discussions just to refresh people's memories. After having discussion in the office about having this presentation, and I told Sister Rebeka, that we want to take advantage of the barakah of Ramadan, right? And we as Muslims believe in unseen entities, and we believe in barakah, right? But we will, inshallah, be having more presentations. What Sister Amy said is extremely important as far as knowing your rights, especially in regards to votes, or at the ballots, and having access to ballots to more than just the English language, and also translators, right? And in particular, since I've been at CAIR Michigan, and even in recent years, there's been problems specifically in Hamtramck, right? There's been a federal consent decree in regards to how elections have been run at Hamtramck going back to 2003 that have negatively impacted Muslims. It's been amended more than once, including about 3 or 4 years ago, in terms of making sure there were Bengali access as far as ballots in the city of Hamtramck. And we've done poll watching in the past in Hamtramck, where we've literally had to go and intervene in regards to issues of people not being able to even vote, or to have translators in Hamtramck in particular. And as we know, Hamtramck is the most densely populated township of Muslims in the United States of America. It's not Dearborn, it's Hamtramck. So that was some valuable information. And I always say in our public presentations that if you do not know your rights shall be trampled upon. And that's how America works. Like there's colorblind laws, and then there's a reality of how there's a disproportionate marginalization and enforcement. Just like similarly, Sister Amy gave the information about once you are in line before the deadline, you're not supposed to be kicked out of line. But we know even in major presidential elections in different areas of the country, African Americans specifically have been disenfranchised for their votes and actually been told they couldn't vote. Right, we know this to be a fact. It's happened in Georgia, in certain townships and counties and other areas, Florida, and this can actually change the election and who gets in. The African American woman who ran for governor, there was some shenanigans going on at the polls, and she didn't lose by a lot of votes. There are real life consequences that when we don't know our rights will be trampled upon. With that, I don't see any comments or questions. Both of you were so thorough. Maybe there were no questions from the viewing audience. Not sure. Not sure if we're being shadow banned either. Sometimes it shows that there's a couple of people watching, and then we go back and look, and there are like more people. So there's also sometimes some shenanigans going on with these platforms. But are there any closing comments or any additions that you have, Sister Rebeka or Sister Amy, before I make a final comment?
I would just like to again say thank you all for this platform, and just want to remind everyone, as Brother Dawood also said, CAIR will be back to share more resources as we get closer to election, but really take advantage of this time that we're in right now. You're seeing your friends and family every night at gatherings. Really encourage each other to vote. It really takes less than 3 minutes to just pull out your phone and say, hey, are you registered to vote? Here's how you do it. So really take advantage of the beautiful, blessed moments that we're in right now. Thank you again. Assalamu alaikum.
So I'm going to say something. Your organization takes donations, correct?
We do, but
okay. So look, so I'm putting on my imam cap right now, and I wear.
You don't have to. It's not necessary at all.
I wear 2 caps. So this is just for the viewing audience. So look, Ramadan, Shahr Ramadan. Abdullah ibn Abbas, who is the first cousin of the Prophet, alayhi salam, he said, Kana Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ajwad an-nas, that the Messenger of God was the most generous of people, and his generosity was the most in the month of Ramadan, and that his generosity was such that it would be like a brisk breeze. Ariha Mursala is the term in Arabic. So APIA Vote Michigan is a secular organization. So of course it's not a Zakat al-Mal eligible organization, because it's not directly targeting only Muslims, right? However, Sadaqah is what is known as mutlaq. So Sadaqah is unrestricted. So during this month of Ramadan, when our charitable donations are more weighty in the scale to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am suggesting to you all that as you give the CAIR Michigan, also consider that you can give a donation to APIA Vote Michigan. And I say that on this platform with full knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is most generous, and our rizq, our sustenance, comes to him. So from him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran also that for whoever is stingy, they're only being stingy for themselves, right? So I can go on this platform and say, yeah, you can give to CAIR Michigan, but I can also say, encourage people to support the work of APIA Vote Michigan. And it's not going to decrease from anything that Allah is going to bless CAIR Michigan with. So you can go to their website and give a donation. I already knew that, Sister Rebeka. I just wanted some verbal confirmation that it was okay for people to donate to your organization as well. Are there any other comments you'd like to make, Sister Amy, before we conclude?
I don't think so at this time, but just get out and vote, and make sure you're voting and enforcing your civic duty and your rights, so we can have a better country to live in and have our voices counted and heard.
Okay, now I'll give my concluding comments, and I'll just make a couple. Number one, we don't put the graphic out as we used to, because some people some of our constituents got offended, but I'm going to say it anyway, that if you're able to vote and you don't vote, then you shouldn't complain, right? Voting, as Sister Rebeka said, is part of your voice. It is actually, some of our Islamic scholars actually said that voting is an obligation for us because it falls under the rubric or the Islamic framework of al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, of enjoying the good and forbidding evil, especially when it comes to ballot initiatives. sometimes voting for candidates, there is no clear lesser than two evil. So in that case, we're not obligated to vote for either or, right? If there's only two candidates running, sometimes it's like you can't say, oh, I don't like Shaitan, so I'm gonna vote for Dajjal. Like sometimes there is no lesser, clear lesser two evils, right? But if you're able to vote and you don't vote, then don't complain about how politicians, aren't doing this or aren't doing that, right? You had your chance to have your voice heard, right? So please go out and vote. The second thing is, and I'm saying this as a African American, and I was saying this last night to some people that who work with another Muslim-ran organization, that my father was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, and he actually was arrested protesting, and he faced jail time, actually prison time, potentially for not going to the Vietnam War. Former Congressman John Conyers actually intervened on his behalf, who was an attorney as well. My mother grew up going to segregated schools in Jim Crow South, right? It wasn't that long ago. My grandfather, who's 97 years old, right? Like he couldn't vote. Like he came up in South Carolina where they still had what's called literacy tests, right? So I'm saying it's not that long ago where African American people, including African Americans who were Muslims, right, who people got arrested. People had hot coffee poured on their heads and sit-ins, right? People had dogs put on them where even some of their flesh was bitten out. People went to prison and were actually beaten, like Fannie Lou Hamer, right? Was beaten in a jail cell, right? For this right that we have, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So I'm saying to Muslims, especially those who come from immigrant backgrounds, who immigrated from South Asia, from Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, from the Arab world, like something that you may take as cavalier, I'm telling you directly that people in my family literally paid the price. And so this is not something, to me, this isn't something that's just theoretical or something like that was read in history books, right? Like my father has like the mug shot of my father, right? So this is just what to say, like don't take this as a joke. We live in a country where there's corruption in our country. There's relative rule of law, right? It's not an issue where someone runs for president, like in Egypt, and gets 99% of the vote, which we know that never happens. That's a rigged election, right? So we have, and besides our voices, we have courts of law in which we can use our voice by filing legal petitions and actually, as minority groups, can have our rights affirmed and upheld in courts of law, which we have done as a community and as an organization at CAIR Michigan. So that's what I'm telling you. Don't take this voting thing so lightly or so cavalier. This is a very a serious matter. Our communities, depending on it, our children, the American society, and our brothers and sisters in places like Kashmir, occupied Kashmir, occupied Palestine. I'm sure they want us to raise our voices and use our votes in the best way. So I just had to say that. Are there any other comments, sisters? If not, we will close out. Okay, thank you very much. And we ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, to accept from us. We ask Almighty Allah to accept our siyam, to accept our qiyam, to accept our tilawatul Quran. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our Sister Rebeka. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect all of the community organizers and activists out here who are striving for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring freedom, justice, and equality to people here and also abroad. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Gaza and in Sudan, the two worst famines that are taking place in the world right now. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the Lord of the heavens and earth, to purify our hearts from hypocrisy and from ostentation or showing off. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in beneficial knowledge, and we seek refuge with Him from knowledge which has no benefit. And we ask all of this by the right of Al-Habib Al-Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, our love for him, that we seek to follow him, and we, through this love, we seek to be forgiven of our sins and for God to set our affairs right. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.